Hello, welcome to my Oracle Think Tank Battlesister deck profile for premium format. This is based on before the P-Clan collection or V-Clan collection volume 5, but it does provide a strong foundation in which you can build on to adapt to the new cards that are coming out. So to start with, we have the Silent Vanguard, Lozenge Mega's image rare because aesthetic reasons, but obviously I think the best starter is technically called HP Yoshi because that one can sort of tilt your opponent to thinking you're playing Tsukuyomi during the first time of the game, so I kind of think maybe Tsukuyomi's starter is probably the best one to use for that reason. Maybe it might affect them deciding which grade one to ride for whatever reason because they anticipate AQ bases. So there is that, technically, but yeah. Otherwise, maybe you just want to play something that's nicer. Then we've got 4 copies of Fromage, the main boss. This is the only Battlesister ride we have right now, so you do want to add this to your hand as much as you can. It has an on-ride draw 2, so no matter what format it is, on-ride draw 2 is always going to be good, whether it's premium or V-premium, and whether you're striding or not striding. But then, what kind of makes this good is that it's kind of a very well-rounded card because you can basically use the other skill if you're not striding, which is also able to work while your opponent's on grade 2 without you needing, for example, a certain card in your soul. Like, for example, Sky Witch Coco, which requires Nini in your soul but isn't really pushing the game. Yo-Yo requires your opponent being on grade 3 to get the restand off. Tsukuyomi requires you having 3 Tsukuyomi pieces to actually be able to do something a bit more pressuring with. So they're just examples of cards that aren't really benefiting quite as much and rely on certain conditions. And obviously if you've seen the Tsukuyomi support from the Clan Collection, both the cards that let you Soul Charge require your opponent being grade 3, so the nerfing is quite strong and Tsukuyomi's deck space is pretty tight as it is, so it doesn't really help either there. But Battlesister Fromage is so good because it doesn't really care, like, in the end. It's not being affected by all these constraints, which is why it's such a well-rounded grade 3. And of course when the reverse comes out, it's going to get only better, because now you're going to have more ride targets as well. But for now we've got 4 Ghost of Sun Amaterasus. So Amaterasu is good because obviously if you reveal her, then you can give your Vanguard 10k in a crit by binding the top card of your deck, whether that's during your turn or whether it's via your G-Guardians, which reveal the top of your deck, which would be the Battlesister Bavrois G-Guard. Obviously the new G-Guard from P-Clan Collection can also help with this as well. And she also has the on-attack stack, so you can either use it to stack for your Vanguard and try maybe get more triggers off with it, or you can use it as your damage check setup, so you can maybe set up more copies of her onto your deck, or H-Kish with the grade 2, all your triggers, and then you'll probably be able to build a wall to deal with something like Nightmare Dolls, which gets loads of attacks that you can't normally go otherwise, or Jewel Knights, which has Crystal Otter Dragon and Battle Door kind of skills. Obviously, building a wall of triggers helps as well with kind of keeping those things away, so that's why I kind of like this card at the moment as well. And of course, you can always damage check the over trigger as well, that's always something. And then next, we have 2 copies of Popo. So Popo is a guard restrict. Obviously, it's not that good if your opponent plays Geoma Glass or Lyrical Veil, but otherwise, it's quite effective at getting attack through compared to other stuff out there, and it doesn't get hit by grade 3 heal guardians like Silent Tom would, and she doesn't get hit by Protect Gift either like Silent Tom also would. So she's good for that reason. Obviously you need to have 10 less in deck, so you have to work towards that condition. Doesn't always work. So it's kind of why Oracle Thinking is a bit iffy at the moment, I would say, compared to some other deck choices out there. But then we've got 4 Trifles. Trifle is good because you basically stack your deck of the top 3 and you can call 1 Battlesister among them as well. She works both on ride and on rear guard. And to make it even better is that she gains 5k on the rear guard circle and she can be a Sentinel restrict by Soul Pass and grade 3. So she does quite a lot of things. She's a very high quality card in that she's multifunctional, let's just say, which is very nice. And then we've got Choquette. So Choquette can basically work on both Vanguard and Rearguard as well, which makes it even better. Basically, you can put something like, well, Fromage, your main right target. Maybe you can use Psychic Bird or something to draw into all Battlesister Troy Jazz, if you don't want to dry check it. So there's that as well. She's also full in case swing. But the thing is that if you get other grade 3s, like for example Amaterasu, then you can immediately bind it and give another 10k and a crit your Vanguard, so you do even more pressure early game, which makes her also better. And then you're also able to do another drive check technically, because now you've binded Amaterasu, allowing you to set up for another drive. Otherwise you can get a grade 3 heal, stack with grade 3 heal on top of your deck and then heal down. So she's good for a lot of reasons as well during the early game. Then we've got 4H Kishima, another card that's also very good in the early game because you can rush potentially with a 19k beta, and also a reveal target to give your Vanguard 10k whether it's during your turn or during your opponent's turn. So she's handy for that. And then we've got 4 copies of Torijas. So Torijas, basically if you reveal Balsastor to your deck with her skill, is a hard one to turn by the way, then you can add Balsas to your hand. Of course, there are non-Balsases in this deck. Some of them are actually okay though to reveal, because for example, if you see a trigger that isn't Balsastor, then it's not too bad, because you probably weren't going to be that enthusiastic in a lot of cases about drawing that trigger in the first place. And so obviously the normal units are the ones that matter more. And Education and Amaterasu are not bad because they still get revealed and they're still going to go off. So even though you don't plus, you're still giving your Vanguard 10k and potentially crit as well. So she's good for that. She also synergizes with stuff like Trifle, so if you do order your deck in a certain way and you do happen to get the setup, then you can also knowingly plus off of that. Otherwise, random blind +1 if you do ride her. Obviously again, can whiff, but I don't think we can really play true pure Balsas at the moment, especially because of trigger reasons, because of, well, grade 3 heals kind of matter to some extent, and I'd say obviously Stratford crits are kind of good. It does feel like you're missing out by not playing them, so there is that as well. Then we've got 4 copies of the Perfect Guard Marmalade. You can play Sentinel triggers as well. They're not actually too bad now, because I think right now with the way people are playing Oracle Think Tank, it's, well, Silent Tom isn't really much of a thing anymore, so Sentinels are either going to get restricted by Trifle, or they're going to use Popo, which stops your Sentinels anyway, regardless of whether it's a normal unit or not. So might as well just potentially play Sentinel triggers, but otherwise, if you do have triggers you want to play and you don't have space for Sentinel triggers, then Marmalade is kind of the good choice to put in here, basically. Which is why I'm playing Marmalade, basically. But I don't think normal units are as important anymore for Perfect Guards, because of the way that OTT has kind of changed with how it's being built, and also in how you counter it, because you don't really need them as much, like, because of how guard restricts are working nowadays. Like, it doesn't seem to make a difference. It seems to be that protect gifts are now being used more on the opponent's Vanguard, if anything. So for now, it's not as much of a loss. You're not really automatically suffering against the OT mirror match, basically. So she's good for that. And also you can add it to your hand with Torijas, which is nice. But yeah, 3+1 if you have almost no hand when you're guarding with this. Obviously, it's a really clunky way to guard, but sometimes you might find yourself in that situation where the remaining cards happen to include the PG. Obviously, it doesn't always happen, because you do have to guard in a specific way. Then there's Amno Murakumo. Amno Murakumo is a grade 3 searcher. Because we only have one right target at the moment, this is kind of an important card. But otherwise, it is good with Amaterasu, because it gives you a Vanguard 10 and a crit. And it is good with the heal trigger, because you're getting a heal in your hand, so still decent. Also can search Popo as well, so it's a high quality card in this deck. But I think when Reverse comes out, you can potentially cut this and play the new grade 1s, and then just add Reverse to your deck as well. Maybe by cutting Amaterasu, you could. Maybe you can cut the Chikishimas as well for the new grade 2 if you wanted to, or you can cut something else if you want. Then there's Overtrigger, even Popos by the way, you can potentially cut, but obviously do a bit of testing with it. But this is again a base to start with. We've got Overtrigger. This is obviously really good, that's why you play it, no other reason. For Muffins, it counter charges, but it is an on attack to do the counter charge, so you aren't able to use the counter blast immediately. You have to wait another turn. It's a bit delayed, so you just have to still be able to take into account counter blast management. It still matters in this deck, as opposed to say Cone Magus, where Cone Magus always counter charges because you revealed with it. So it's different. Like you do have to manage your counter blast still kind of carefully. But she's really good with Momo, because Momo, basically if you have the Oracle setup and you swing the Momo first before you do the discard, you can do the counter charge too. So then you meet Momo, and then yeah, you get your counter charge too. You do discard 3 for Momo, but then you draw check 3 back, so then you should have the same amount of hands still anyway. So then you can then use Muffin the second time around to get another 2 counter charge, so you can refresh your counter blast basically if you've used up 4 or something. That's a thing you can do. She also gives 3k power, which is a nice bonus. And she's a crit that goes back into your deck, so if you're just drawing like ham and then you got almost nothing in your deck, but you drew into this card, then you can basically secure your crits. It doesn't always happen though, because you do still have to at the end of the day dig through your deck, and I think it just makes a deck so complex when you've got all these different like what if scenarios that you're playing into, which Balsas does kind of suffer from. It does suffer from a bit of the what if kind of situation, because there's a lot of what ifs that don't always happen, but you have to be careful not to fall into a trap of kind of playing too hard into your what if scenarios, and then it doesn't happen and you're like, oh snap, I really should have just gone for another route instead in trying to set up for winning the game. So that's something you might experience actually when playing with this deck. as well. The other thing is as well that you can make use of the counter charge as well and then get the counter blast from Momo right after, so that's also quite nice. And then we've got 4 Psychic Bird because it's a soul charge, and also we are desperate to draw cards, certain cards, especially from Edge. So Psychic Bird is still very important. Also, it fuels the soul for both Ichikishima and from Edge, so there's that too, which is why I play it. Obviously, it means more 5k triggers, which is the downside. But yeah, if you were to play Centaur triggers, maybe you cut either this or Muffin potentially down a bit for that reason. But yeah, this is what we've got for now. Then we've got 3 copies of Toto, Stride full of crit. I don't really want to miss out on it. And then again, I don't want to miss out on grade 3 heals either because of the synergies that the deck has with them. So normally these would have otherwise have been Battle Ginger and the Battle Sister heal trigger, but they've released these cards since. So I guess so much for Battle Sister triggers. And then as for the G Zone, we've got 4 Ichikishima, which is an important card. It's a bit different to other finishers in that the moment you stop using this card, like either you run out of them or you can't achieve Oracle anymore, you're in a lot of trouble because this card doesn't actually advance the game state in terms of like how much damage it does to your opponent's hand, because this card doesn't force your opponent to guard, especially in ways that take out more cards. Like for example, let's just take the most classic example, Lambros, right? Obviously there's a lot of cards in the game that do put pressure, but that card, for example, gets you 2 extra attacks, right? So in nature, that means you're basically going to drop more cards to guard against Lambros because they make you drop more. They're not telling you not to guard, they're telling you to guard more. So you're dropping more cards. So then something that comes out after, like Alexandros, for example, or Savas, they're all going to complement that Lambros stride. Whereas Ichikishima, it tells your opponent not to guard. So if they just damage like a heal or over trigger or whatever, or you just didn't do enough pressure because they guarded too early from earlier on, then it doesn't really feel like you've done anything to kind of advance the game by the time you're out of this. If you're out of this, your opponent's probably still sitting there now with a high quality hand. And now if you strode Momo, for example, well, Momo requires 3 cards in hand, so I don't think you'll be able to do Momo either, because unless you're decking out, but yeah, you wouldn't be able to do Momo almost all the time either at the same time if you can't use Ichi. Let's just say you stride Kama Susano. You still don't feel like you've made the progress. Like, you're not really complementing the progress Ichikishima made. You're now back to square one, it feels like. That's kind of the problem with this card at the moment, and because of grade 3 heals, obviously we've got less ways of finishing, which is why we play Popo, because we're kind of worried about not making numbers meet as well. And obviously there's Trifle now being played. So yeah, there's just, it's a bit more trickier now, that's for sure. And of course we go against Grand Blue, which has Protect Gifts, Bad Bounty. That's also an issue if you don't play Popo. So yeah, it's a bit complicated now. So I would say, like, again, there's a lot of what ifs that go on in this clan at the moment, and the winning image isn't quite as clear as other decks out there, I'd say. There's 2 Momos. Momo is basically a restand stride. It's very good in this deck with Fromage, because Fromage is an immediate +2 as opposed to, say, Magus, where Magus, they can get more drives to plus with, but the problem with getting more drives is that you're getting hand later, but the options in which you can discard from are shrinking, so you're probably going to be discarding some of the best cards like Protect Gifts or Heal Triggers, which is kind of the issue I have with Moment Makers. Whereas in Fromage, you're getting the on-ride draw too, so then you're less likely to drop high quality cards, and it's more controllable as well, and usually you do have a decent hand after that. And that's the Marmalade, as I mentioned earlier. It's a PG that can draw as well during your opponent's turn, so you can still sort of feel like you're compensating by PGing with it, so you don't feel like you're losing too badly in some cases. So it's kind of okay in terms of synergy in this deck. Then we have 2 copies of Faustus Stolen. If you don't want to use Momo because Momo eats your hand, you can always go into Stolen. That way you're gaining Generation Break while doing similar things to Faustus Fromage. So she's good for that reason. She doesn't plus, but she can potentially blow some heal triggers off because you've used the skill. So that's always a thing. And obviously more important if you're going against a deck like Make Colony, which has Gridora blocking you from G-Guarding because you're trying to G-Guard upwards otherwise to use Ichikishima because it's GB3. Then we've got Gelato, it's free basically, unless you don't have Soul, but if you have Soul and you can't use Counter Blast, then she's always an option, so you at least do something to get Generation Break. Then you've got GL Calm Susano. This is basically a card you can go into if you're losing the game badly and use to draw cards. But I think if you're losing the game badly and need to draw loads of cards, I think almost all the time you're probably going to lose the game, because I mean, I don't think it's often that when I go into this card and I draw loads that I actually have a chance to win, because my deck then starts to shrink too much, and it feels like my opponent then just has like a very easy turn because all I'm doing is just swing with this big guy. And that's kind of the problem when your clan starts to rely too much on a specific stride, basically. So maybe not the best in this deck. This is actually good in other decks though, like for example Oracle Witches. It's actually quite decent with that because Oracle Witches, obviously besides drawing cards, they are relying more on rear guards because they have Yo-Yo. And obviously 5k in crit is also more handy in that case as well. So yeah, just not as good in Battle Sisters. Like, you're probably losing the game good in Battle Sisters, but in other decks, like Witches, it's pretty good. And then we have 2 Amaterasus. Amaterasu is a soul charging G-Guard, a big shield that's also free, and it can also help you damage take a trigger. Obviously, you can't reveal Chikishima or Goddess of the Sun Amaterasu because this card doesn't reveal, and so just bear that in mind when you choose to use this. But you can use it with these Bowster Bavroises because Bowster Bavrois, it can reveal. It's also drawing you a card as well, but you always have to be careful because if you get something that has like a Battle Duel skill and you can't make the shield value, maybe you might be better off using Amaterasu, but otherwise if you do manage to make the shield value, then, well, good for you then. That means you don't have to drop anything else, but I mean, you probably have to get like, you have to manage to reveal normal units so you get the 5k shield, and if that 5k shield's not enough, then you might be forced to drop something else. If you're forced to drop something else, an actual unit from your hand, then you're forced to drop another card, which sort of defeats the purpose of using the G-Guardians to counter Battle Duel skills. So you have to be a bit careful with that as well. This card is not always the perfect card to go into, basically. Unless you know what the top card of the deck is, and you can plan around it. Then there's Dismal. Dismal is there because it can protect a key rearguard, or it can just kind of get in the way of some obscure plays as well. It's just handy to have one of these. So that's pretty much it for the main deck profile, but then to move on to the rest, obviously things that you can change. You can play sensible triggers, like draw PGs or critical triggers if you want to. That can help. Maybe you can take out Muffins or Psychic Bird, for example. And obviously if you want to then take out the Marmalades, the normal perfect cards, you can potentially consider running other grade 1s instead. So some grade 1s to consider could be like, for example, Bowser's the Panatone. She can soul charge, so she still makes up for if you were to cut Psychic Bird, for example, in terms of getting soul. She can give 10k power as well, so she can kind of complement Torijas and Trifle, because the thing is like a card like, say for example, Kasata. Kasata does the same thing as Torijas. Only difference is you need to get a drive check trigger for the 10k to apply, and it's only 5k more power than Torijas. Whereas this card, while getting you soul, and of course it is a neg 1 technically, but the game isn't meant to last that long, so I think it's not too bad if you're calling this as well for power. But if you're coming with this with Torijas, you're ultimately getting more power in the end than if you're using Kasata, which is sort of like the middle ground between the two. It's sort of like you're not able to use this, but then this card has to replace Torijas, like be called over it, which kind of defeats the point of Torija, so it gets a bit cannibalistic, I guess, on your board, whereas Panatone doesn't because she complements. So that's something to consider. Obviously you can play both of these, but deck space might not always favour you. So then we have the other cards. So let's just start with Bamkuchen. When the reverse comes out, this will be a much better choice. Obviously if you do play Preyline, then this is also decent for Preyline, if you want to just search for a 23k beta for whatever reason, if that's the way you want to go with things. But at the moment I don't think she's as great right now. Until the reverse comes out, then she'll be a bit better by then. If you play Florentine though, she's good with Florentine as well. And then there's Risk. So Risk is quite good because if you were in, for example, a Link Joker environment, which isn't the case right now, but if it was ever happen, especially with all the reverse cards they keep making, then yeah, just make sure you have these on hand if you're a Bowser's player, just in case that the meta ever goes in that direction where you need to play this card, because there might be a time. I mean, just remember, Oracle Think Tank has historically always had a bad matchup against Link Joker, so just be wary of that. Make sure to arm yourself. Don't let some guy buy 1,000 commons because they're so cheap and then scalp you all the way to high heaven when the time comes. And then next we have these grade 2s. So other grade 2s you could consider is Balsa's Sable. She's a 3+1, but you need to have soul. So obviously by playing Balsa's Triquette, you are eating more soul. So potentially you could miss out on that. She also does require you having 3 or more other Bow Sisters, so this can sometimes be awkward to make the conditions for, but otherwise she's free value. 9Ks aren't quite as good as they used to be, so unless you have a booster behind it, she's a bit iffy, because there's now more 10k bases. Besides just having Force decks running around, like Regalia for example, you've also got Nightmare Dolls, which are now, well, besides the Silverthorn 10k vanilla from before, now you've got the Direful Dolls, which is something to look out for. There's also Mega Colony, which has Shadow Cloak, another kind of heavily played deck. Luard has a lot of 10k vanillas, or sorry, 10k rides as well. So there's just some examples there of some popular decks that this card might not do too much against because of that reason. And then you've got Macaron, so if you do want to hit stuff and you don't want to pay Soul Blast cost, but you're not plussing anyway, then you can always go into Macaron. Macaron's a free 19k pretty much just by looking at your deck. And then you've got Theo, which is a way to soul charge grade 3s, provide your opponents on grade 3 though, because obviously it's an on-ride, on-plays, whatever, counters one draw card, but then you have to stack a normally on top of your deck. If your opponent's grade 3, then you can soul charge that stacked card, so that's how you get your grade 3 in the soul. But yeah, the on-ride draw is decent I guess, but obviously you do want to try and also minimize non-bouncers as much as you can. She's good as well Popo, because she can recycle key cards like Popo, and then you just draw Popo back. So I've always liked her for that reason as well. Then we'll take a look at these other grade 3s. We've got Florentine, an alternative ride target. She can always give your units power, which can help for pressuring, and she can stack the deck as well. And then we've got Praline. Praline is the beta. You can also superior call her if you play like the Baus starter, the one, I think it was Eclair or something, I can't remember, but she checks like top 3, and then you can just superior call something. She's good with that, or with Trifle, because obviously Superior Call doesn't care what grade your Vanguard is, so she can be cheeky for that play, which doesn't make her too bad of a card. But of course, Reverse, if you want to play the new From Edge Reverse when it comes out, you can potentially cut your Amateras's or your Popos. If you want to play the new grade 1, you can potentially cut the Amna Murakumo, and the reason why Amna Murakumo is easy to cut then is because basically if you're playing Reverses, you've got now more ride targets. You've got 8 maximum ride targets. You can play less than 8 reverses potentially, but yeah, let's just say you've got your 8 ride targets at max. Then that means now you don't have to desperately draw your cards as much now. So Amna Murakumo kind of doesn't become as important as before. Same with Balsa's Triquette. You can try and just hard draw them more now, which is kind of good. And now you can benefit from having a good on ride or a stacking card basically that gives units power. And then you've got the grade 2. The grade 2 can replace potential Ichikishima if you want to. I think like if they do hit, for example, Nightmare Doll Ginny or something in the next ban list, then I think there's more reason to not need Amaterasu and Ichikishima as much, because one of the big reasons that I've been trying to play those cards in my decks is because of that deck specifically. Because obviously, well, it's not just Nightmare Dolls technically, there's also Jewel Knights as well, which can be annoying. But I think OTT you can try to sort of maybe draw quite heavily against Jewel Knights. I do probably need to test that matchup again. It's been a while since I've tried that, so I can't remember how it goes. But yeah, I think with Mass Draw you do have more of a chance maybe against Jewel Knights. Otherwise, then yeah, the Battle Sister deck, I think you can pretty much make those specific replacements with more confidence if that ban list was to take place. Just something to consider really. So that's pretty much my kind of thoughts on the V-Clan collection. If you do want to cut stuff out for the new stuff, and P-Clan collection, I don't think anything really changes when that set comes. The new G-Guard is obviously good with Amaterasu Ichikishima. Of course, it's another way to try and use those cards, but you don't have to be avoiding that card just over those cards anyway, so still doesn't make a difference. It's your call if you want to play Amaterasu Ichikishima. And then there's the Stride, the Happiness Dragon King Stride, which doesn't really kind of suffer as much, but it could be an extra kind of reason to not play Amna Murakumo, because Amna Murakumo only works when called from hand, but Dragon King basically checks the top cards of your deck and then it superior calls all the normal units. So you're not actually superior calling from your hand, because it's not actually going to your hand like with Susano, for example, right? you're basically calling from the top of your deck. So you can't use Unknown Murakumo if you use the Dragon King, which means that maybe then this is another reason Unknown Murakumo becomes less appealing in Battle Sister as well. So we've just found a few more reasons to maybe cut it. Besides having more Battle Sisters to ride now, we've got that as another reason to maybe cut Unknown Murakumo. And the other thing is as well is that Perfect Guards, Grade 1 Perfect Guards, they are also forced onto the Raid Guard circle, which is kind of annoying. It kind of reminds me all over again of Agnos and why people don't like Agnos quite as much. Obviously Agnos is kind of worse, but because it calls everything, but the Dragon King does have a kind of a little bit of the Agnos problem where you're forced to call cards you don't want to call, and normal Perfect Guards are a victim to that. So Sentinel triggers can be quite good. In fact, because you play cards like Muffin, you don't even have to feel as bad, because if you lose critical triggers, or well, the thing is that I have an issue with is basically I don't really like playing draw PGs because it means less crits usually, and obviously OT kind of relies way too much on crits at the moment, so that's a bit of a problem. But then if you have Bowser the Muffin, you have that kind of reassurance that you can put cards back into your deck and increase your crit count again, without having to do convoluted stuff like Tetra Magus, where you have the Counter Blast one, place a card from your hand, and then put a trigger and -1 extra card again from your hand. Well, you are drawing a card as well, but it's a bit more like a multiple card combo, like 2-card combo, which means you have less flexibility in how you guard, and it's a bit more blind. But I think Muffin has that kind of advantage where it's more direct and it's just a 1-card thing. There's no like convoluted stuff. You don't have to like worry about an extra thing while doing it, and you can even draw into it later, and you don't have to worry about counterblast either. So Muffin does have that advantage. So Sentinel triggers are quite good, I think. They might be worth considering more for the Dragon King, and that's pretty much my thoughts for how you can modify Battle Sisters from this deck list when the new sets come out. Obviously, I haven't tested these things, but these are just my thoughts on what things I might probably be doing from a little bit pondering. Obviously, I'm kind of spending more time thinking about Springfest right now, trying to just do that last one, and then I'll start smashing out a lot of new deck profiles for P-Clan Collection next. So I hope you enjoyed that deck profile and found it useful. Let me know in the comments down below how you find it, what you might do with it, what kind of testing you've been doing with Battle Sisters, and if you're excited for new stuff, and I'll see you around later. Goodbye.